Good day, and welcome to another in our seminar series. Today's presentations and discussions are on school environments, mental health, and human flourishing. Our lead presenters are Antonia Cotton and Julika Niehaus. Our discussants are Maria Altamirano, Marie Williams, Shweta Cari, Simon Lightman, and Priyanka Handa. We begin with our lead presenters, so let me tell you about them. Antonia Cotton is Director of Partnerships at Urban Health 360, an international organization advancing health equity through urban research, advocacy, and knowledge exchange. She's a specialist in cross-sector partnerships, strategy, and facilitation. She works across public health, education, local government, civil society, and philanthropy, building partnerships that translate evidence into real-world change. With the International Panel on Social Progress, Antonia leads on the Partnerships for Policy Action, Impact and Change cluster of the Human Security, Public Health and Population Wellbeing Working Group. In this capacity, she convened and co-designed this particular version of the seminar series with fellow practitioner Julika Niehaus, bringing international intersectional expertise into dialogue with the working group mission. Antonio, again, as I said earlier, leads on partnership development across the UK and internationally, connecting communities, researchers, and policymakers and practitioners to drive system change for Urban Health 360. She also serves on the advisory group for the Healthy City Design Congress, Europe's leading annual gathering on urban health and design. Her practice is grounded in the principle that meaningful change requires community voices at the center. With her today is her colleague, Julika Niehaus, who's a subject matter expert for school communities and play at Urban Health 360, where she works to advance health equity by exploring how school and neighborhood environments can better support children's mental health and well-being. Julika has 20 plus years experience in social justice and systems change, and her work focuses on education, transformation, prevention and early intervention, and the relational conditions that enable children to thrive. Prior to joining Urban Health 360, she led a children's mental health portfolio at Impact on Urban Health, which is part of the Guy's and St. Thomas Foundation. She oversaw strategy, investment, and learning across their school communities portfolio. Her work emphasized nurturing environments, connection, belonging, and shifting the wider systems that shape everyday experiences of children across the board in their environments. She brings particular expertise in the role of play as a protective and relational force in children's lives. As an expert play commissioner on the Raising the Nation Play Commissioner, she co-led a national inquiry that helped elevate play within policy and investment. Her practice is grounded in collaboration, bringing together schools, communities, researchers, policymakers, and young people to co-design solutions and drive collective action. I am very excited to hear from both Antonia and Julika. We'll begin with them, and then when we come to the discussants, I will introduce them. So over to you, Antonia and Julika.
Thank you, Yonette. So when Julika and I began shaping this session, we made a deliberative choice. We didn't want a panel of people just talking about children, families, and communities. We wanted to build a conversation that works at multiple levels simultaneously, so research, practice, policy, and lived experience, because that's where real change happens. That's the partnership lens I want to bring to the next 90 or so minutes. And I've had the privilege of speaking to our contributors ahead of today. And before I hand over, I want to offer three things that I believe are true about this work and that I think will help us listen differently today. So firstly, the ecosystem matters as much as the intervention. There's a tendency in this field to look for the program, the intervention, the thing that works. But what we'll hear today is that the conditions matter as much as the content. That means not designing for play or for well-being, but designing the conditions that make them possible. That's a systems insight, not a program or a project insight, and it has profound implications for how we work across sectors. The expertise in this room is not the problem. The question is whether it's connected to communities, to decision makers, to the people whose lives it's meant to change, and that's the ecosystem builder's role. Secondly, transformational change works at every level: child, family, community, system. What's striking about the work represented in this room today is that it refuses to stay in one lane. The contributors you'll hear from are working simultaneously at the level of the child, the family, the neighbourhood, and the system, from the earliest years of development through to advocacy for policy change. Across radically different contexts, urban and rural, global south and global north, there are shared principles about what it takes to make change stick. The model I want to hold up is this: transformational change in children's well-being doesn't happen at one level. It happens when we connect the child, the family, the community, and the system, and when we build sustainable partnerships that allow those levels to talk to each other, and from there, create impact. And thirdly, evidence needs to move from practice into policy. A question I'm interested in, and that I wanted to hold throughout today, is not just what works, but how does it move? How do we take decades of practice-based learning and make it legible to practitioners and policymakers? How do we translate what works in one community into something a local authority, a school body, or a national policy framework can act on? The separation of mental health and learning is a structural problem, not just a conceptual one. It gets reproduced in funding streams, in professional silos, and how we design buildings and curricula. Closing that gap requires people in this room working together across those silos. This is the work of partnerships, and it's where the IPSP's mission is most alive, not just generating evidence, but building the relationships and the infrastructure that allow evidence to move. So across the next 90 minutes, we're going to move between scales, between research and practice, between local action and systemic change, between the classroom and the community. This session sits within a wider ecosystem of work that Urban Health 360 is proud to be a part of, through our partnership with Healthy City Design, which Yonette mentioned previously, a leading annual gathering on urban health and design, and with Cities and Health, the international journal curating and communicating research for policy and practice. We are constantly asking the same question: how do we make sure the right knowledge reaches the right people in a form that they can act on? We have a session approved at Healthy City Design this October, Beyond the School Gates, Neighbourhood Design, Play and Community Health, and today's conversation will directly inform what we bring into that room. The gap in this field is rarely the evidence, it's the infrastructure to move it. This session is part of building that infrastructure, and the opportunity is to leave with more than insight, to leave with relationships that can move things. That's the work of partnerships. Before I hand over, I want to take a moment to thank Yonette Thomas and Margot Thomas and the team at IPSB, whose vision and generosity in creating this series and in consistently opening doors, uplifting voices that might not otherwise be heard, and creating space for cross-sector, cross-continental conversation has made today possible. We're grateful. Over to you, Julika.
Thank you so much. And to echo those things, thrilled to be here. Antonia framed what we need as an ecosystem. And because ecosystems are only as strong as their parts, I want to zoom in on one critical aspect of that ecosystem, the school. Not as a building or a delivery mechanism, but as a living environment that enables or undermines children's flourishing every day. Schools are one of those few places that touch almost every child's life. And following Antonia's lead, rather than focusing on a particular program or a particular solution, I'd like to share 3 reflections about the role schools can play in creating the conditions for human flourishing. And my first reflection is that I believe we need to revisit a fundamental question. What are schools actually for? because the answer we give to that question shapes everything else, from how schools are organized, to what we prioritize, to the environments we create for children every day. And our systems tend to default to a relatively narrow answer: academic attainment, measurable outputs, and performance. But when you spend time in schools, you see something much richer. Some schools are, and all schools have the potential to be places where children build relationships, develop identity, experience belonging. They learn how to regulate emotions, discover their strength, and make sense of the world. In other words, schools are not simply places of instruction. They're environments for human development. Yet many of our policies, our incentives, and accountability structures can make it appear as if attainment is the primary and the sole goal, and well-being just an afterthought. So a case in point, and I'm drawing on stats here that we shared as part of the UK's Play Commission's final report last year. Here in the UK, children at Key Stage 1, that's 5 to 7-year-olds, now have 23 minutes less a day break time on average than their peers did in 1995. So going from 94 minutes in 95 to 71 minutes a day in 2021. And a second stat: 53% of secondary schools and 58% of primary schools withhold some of or even entire break times for behavioral reasons. Those stats tell a story, and that's a story of play, of connection, and of belonging being at risk of being considered as optional extras, whereas in fact I'd argue they're foundational conditions for children's learning, well-being, and healthy development. And the evidence increasingly supports that. It suggests that play supports emotional regulation, identity formation, resilience, and well-being, and that children's development is shaped by the broader environments in which they live and learn. So my first reflection is, until we're clearer that schools are platforms for human development, not just attainment, we will continue designing environments that are inadvertently undermining the very well-being we're trying to promote. And that brings me to my second reflection. If schools are platforms for human development, then they cannot be understood in isolation. Children's lives don't begin and end at the school gate, and neither do the conditions that shape their well-being. And that raises a question: how should schools show up in their communities? One idea I find helpful is thinking about schools as community anchors. And by that, I mean institutions that are rooted in place, that are trusted by local people and able to connect families, services, local residents, community organizations around shared goals. And importantly, I don't think that means schools should be taking responsibility for everything. In fact, I think the shift we need is for schools to move from expert provider to more of a facilitator and convener role. As an example, for the past several years, I've been fortunate to be involved in an initiative called the Old Kent Road Family Zone. It's a community-led initiative that starts with the school community and works across children, families, and neighborhoods. And the power of that work comes not from schools solving every problem themselves, but from creating the conditions for collaboration, for shared responsibility, and for local ownership. And in my experience, more sustainable change is often achieved when communities are supported to identify and act on their own priorities. So the role of school becomes less about delivering solutions and more about enabling relationships, enabling participation, and enabling collective action. And perhaps one of the most important outcomes of that approach is agency. People feel that things are happening with them rather than to them. So to wrap up my second reflection, schools can be powerful anchors of place and of well-being, but only when they see themselves as part of the wider ecosystem, and if they're willing to share power with families, communities, and partner organizations. My third reflection is that education systems spend a great deal of time discussing what children should learn. In comparison, we often spend less time discussing the conditions under which children learn and thrive best. I recently had the opportunity visiting a really wonderful primary school in Greenwich, near London here in the UK, where staff are challenging some of the assumptions that underpin mainstream education here. And what they do is they draw on a Reggio Emilia-inspired approach known as pioneering. And they've created learning environments that center curiosity, play, relationships, exploration, and agency. And in practice, when you walk through those classrooms, it feels different, and it feels different, and it looks different. So those classrooms look more like laboratories or ateliers, and children have more agency to explore their own interests, alone or in small groups. And what struck me when walking those corridors and classrooms wasn't the absence of rigor, and that's a challenge proponents of play get a lot here in the UK. It was that rigor looked and felt different. Children were engaged, making choices. They were collaborating, solving problems, and directing aspects of their own learning. The environment itself appeared to be supporting children's engagement, their exploration, and their development. And I think that matters enormously for inclusion, because when we design around how children learn, including through movement, through relationships, exploration, and play, more children can participate fully. More children get to experience success, and more children get to thrive. If developmental science tells us that healthy development depends on relationships, play, agency, and supportive environments, then we should expect schools to be designed around those principles. So in closing, across all those reflections, I think the common thread is that this discussion is not really about adding more responsibilities to schools. It's about reframing what schools are there to do. If schools are places for human development, if they act as anchors within their communities, and if they are designed around how children actually learn and thrive, then mental health and flourishing are no longer separate objectives, but outcomes we're more likely to see when the conditions are right. So that's the question and the challenge I want to leave us with. How do we create the conditions in schools, communities, and neighborhoods for flourishing to emerge, not as an intervention, but as a natural consequence of the environments in which children grow, learn, and play? Thank you.
Well, Antonia and Julika have set the stage. So with that, I will ask that our discussants be added to the stage, and I will introduce them before I turn it over to each one to give their insights. So let me tell you about our discussants. Maria Altamirano is an education consultant, learning designer, and facilitator with more than a decade of experience across Latin America, the United States, East Africa, and the Middle East. Her work centers on learning through play and on designing the conditions, relationships, spaces, and everyday practices that help people learn, connect, and thrive. For 8 years, she worked at the Lego Foundation and with their partners on play-based approaches to children's learning and well-being. She has contributed to research and programs that strengthen how schools and communities support children's mental health through play, helping develop training and resources reaching over 100,000 teachers, families, and school leaders, adapted to setting that range from well-resourced classrooms to communities facing significant adversity. Before the Lego Foundation, she spent years developing educational technology programs and is the author of over 25 publications on digital skill development for teachers and children. As an independent consultant, much of her work is turning evidence into practice. She designs play-based learning experiences and curricula, builds the capacity of teachers and other facilitators, and translates research on children's development and well-being into resources that hold up in real classrooms and communities in person, online, and in high and low resource settings. Her interest sits where learning design, social emotional development, and mental health support meet. Specifically, how can everyday environment be shaped to carry both learning and well-being at the same time? Maria is bilingual in Spanish and English. She holds a master's degree in education entrepreneurship and a background in pedagogy. Her enduring question is how the systems around children can be designed so that everyone has what they need to flourish and their voice is truly heard. I'm looking forward to hearing from Maria on this. And with Maria, there is Marie Williams, another Marie. She is a chartered engineer, design lecturer, TEDx speaker, and founder and CEO of Dream Network's social enterprise. Over the last 10 years, she has led the co-design and delivery of sustainable, inclusive play spaces across the UK and East Africa, where she creates play opportunities for over 60,000 people. Her work brings together engineering, design, and participatory practice to address inequity through play. Working alongside children and families, educators, and communities, Dream Networks develops culturally grounded regenerative approaches that position users as design partners and create environments where children can thrive. Alongside designing and building play spaces, Marie's work increasingly focused on systems change. Through research, policy, development, and practical frameworks, she helps organizations embed play into the design of neighborhoods, schools, and public spaces while measuring the impact on children's development and the environment. Marie is in her final year for a PhD at UCL, University College London. Her research explores how co-design, design plurality, and decolonial practice can expand equitable access to outdoor play in urban and refugee contexts. It is so important for me to read each of these bios, and you will see, audience, why the intersectionality of the work of each of the discussants with the themes that are presented here. So I go to Shweta Shari. Shweta is the co-founder and CEO of the Opentree Foundation. She has been a champion of children's right to play for over 2 decades and has been working towards mainstreaming play-based learning in India. A driven individual, Shweta is an engineer by education. She is a Harvard Business School Strategic Nonprofit Management India Program alumna and an Ashoka Fellow. She believes that play is a powerful catalyst for transforming childhood to adulthood trajectories, especially for at-risk children. Under her visionary leadership, the Opentree Foundation has addressed the developmental needs of over 1 million at-risk children across Maharashtra through its life skills play programs. These scalable, impactful programs have been recognized by global platforms like 100. In addition to all of this, Shweta is the recipient of the 2025 Child's Right to Play Advocacy Award, which is given by the International Play Association in the United States. She's also the recipient of the Quimpro Gold Standard in Education, and she has also received the Angels of Mumbai Award by the Free Press Journal. We're looking forward to hearing more from Shweta because she has been working towards mainstreaming play and play-based learning in India and will not stop till the right to play becomes a reality. And I go to Simon Lightman, sorry, apologies, Simon. Simon works at the intersection of school leadership, sustainability education, and systems change, with a particular interest in how education can respond responsibly to a world in transition. His work is grounded in the daily realities of school, but also shaped by public philosophy, research, youth governance, and policy engagement. So Simon works across the UK and internationally, and he's done so in academic, pastoral, and whole school development roles, spanning things like curriculum design, teaching and learning, sixth form provision. I remember my sixth form years, boarding, global citizenship, and student leadership. So naturally, he has taught and led across A and O levels. Americans may not recognize what A and O levels are, but those in the UK and children of the former British colonies like myself will get that. And the various exams, certifications at the multiple level. He remains committed to the craft of teaching as the foundation of incredible education leadership. His writing and public policy work explore the ethical, ecological, and civil responsibilities of education. So, with that, he has led the Open Letter on Sustainability and Curriculum Reform, which is a national cross-sector initiative advocating for the integration of sustainability and systems thinking within the UK curriculum. And he has contributed various commentaries and in important contexts like tests, school week, and other education platforms. He's a fellow of the Chartered College of Teaching, a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, a freeman of the Worshipful Company of Educators, and is a member of the British Educational Research Association. And his academic work has been featured in the European Journal of Sustainable Development, and he has other forthcoming contributions to publications like the Oxford Handbook of Global Citizenship Education and the Bloomsbury Global Flourishing Goals volume. He is drawn to educational contexts, and his focus is heavily on academic rigor, combined with pastoral care, sustainability, global citizenship, and educational purpose. We look forward to hearing more from Simon. I go next to Priyanka Handa. Priyanka is the co-founder and chief energy officer of Learn to Play, which is based in Botswana. It's a nonprofit working to expand access to quality early education through community-led play-based models. Since founding the organization in 2017, she has led its growth from a small grassroots initiative to a nationally recognized organization partnering with the government, with communities, and international entities to reach children and families across Botswana, across Africa, and I suspect around the world. Her leadership in Learn to Play, through her leadership in Learn to Play, she has developed and scaled innovative programs, including community play groups, parenting interventions, teacher training, and mindful play approaches that integrate social emotional learning and well-being into early childhood education. Priyanka is a social entrepreneur, a children's author, and advocate for play-based learning. As a mother of two, she's passionate about ensuring that every child, regardless of circumstance, has access to the nurturing relationships, play, and learning opportunities that facilitate their ability to thrive. And as I read the bios of each of these presenters, I go back to Antonia's connection of research to practice to policy making, and the whole ecosystem that Julika talked about in her 3 reflections. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from each of you. I just want to be a little bit of a reminder that you each have 5 minutes. So let's go. Who will begin? Do we begin with, and don't be worried, Simon, if you need to go over, you have that worried look, you're fine. So let's enjoy this. This promises to be so informative, and I look forward to hearing from each of you. So I assume we will begin with Maria. And so over to you, Maria.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you all, and thank you for the invitation. So it's interesting because the name of this panel is about mental health flourishing in school environments, and yet, as you have read, Yonette, everyone's bios, we are all about play, right? So why? And the reason I am a true believer of play, it's because it's low stakes, right? A mistake in play will not carry the same weight a mistake will take on a graded test. And that's what will make risk-taking and critical thinking and exploration possible. Trying something, failing, trying differently without it necessarily costing you. But the problem is that access to low-stakes spaces is not necessarily evenly distributed, right? Like well-researched schools, environments can afford these exploratory ungraded time, whereas under-resourced environments and schools are already carrying these high-stakes testing, sometimes disciplinary measure, and often get pushed towards these punitive versions of school. Exactly when students need these low-stakes spaces the most. So if children get to fail and iterate, it's not just a choice a teacher makes in the school. It's actually, to me, a justice question. If school is meant to be this platform for human flourishing and not just attendance, these low stakes spaces need to be part of the core and the infrastructure, not necessarily something that only these schools that can already afford it get to offer, right? And I would like to bring this case, this project I worked for last year that is led by UNICEF in the Middle East, and it's called Play and Heal, where they did significant research in several countries around what were these. Antonia talked about the conditions, right? The second thing I would like to talk about actually is that, well, we know play is important. We need low stakes environments, but we're not the expert designers of these play activities for children. We're actually, in my opinion, the ones that design conditions for play to emerge. And in this research that UNICEF did in these countries, they found that there's 5 characteristics that really help play emerge, not just for learning, but this project was specifically focused on healing and mental health and psychosocial support in crisis settings. But I think these 5 characteristics apply in school environments, in public spaces, in learning, in healing, and in thriving and connecting as communities. The first one is safety. So feeling a sense of being valued, prepared, and physically, emotionally, and socially secure. The second being connection and belonging, which I think Julika also mentioned. So feeling the sense of belonging to a group and being able to work through problems socially instead of carrying them alone. So our schools, our spaces, our communities allowing for that, and are the conditions even for teachers in terms of time and staffing allowing for those moments of connection and belonging. The third one being expression. So having ways to release what you are feeling, permission to let it out through art, sound, movement, words. And that's also something that schools tend to cut when budgets tighten. Art, music, drama, which means that the students that are most likely to need different means of representing and expressing emotions tend to be the ones left with the fewest options. The fourth characteristic being mastery and control, so feeling agency and having the opportunity to master something, to overcome your own obstacles. Where in most schools, or at least the schools I attended, real choice competes with compliance at schools, scripted curricula, guides, high stakes testing, and again, that pressure keeps falling hardest on the schools that are the most under-resourced and the ones with the highest needs. And the final one being sense of self. Sense of self meaning that you know your strengths and you have a reason to feel that you're worth caring for, that you deserve dignity and acceptance. And again, in schools and environments, whose strengths get to be noticed, named, and celebrated, and whose aren't. With these tracking and early sorting and attainment measures, children could be quietly being told that they are not worth, long before anyone tells them that they are worth and that they are deserving of so many things. So again, just to summarize, I think we don't design for play, we design for these conditions that make play happen, and that it needs to be low stakes. And we need to really think in the spaces that we are participating in, advocating for, and designing, and thinking of how to provide opportunities for these low stakes play, and not necessarily over-engineering play for children. That is it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Much food for thought there, and we'll hold on our Q&A, and we'll go right next to our next discussant. And I think the next person here is Shweta. Shweta, you're up.
I just present this. It's just, so this is like my favorite topic, and I didn't realize 20 years ago that I'd be here propagating play how at the scale at which I'm doing it right now, and kind of gotten really desperate now, almost like, hey, I've got to do this within my lifetime. So it's a sense of urgency and rigor that is absolutely nuts at this moment. You know, I volunteered straight out of engineering, and I realized during my volunteering days with the kids that I was spending time with, how much emphasis was given to conventional learning and education, to the extent that I barely knew my kids. I was about 21 years of age at that time. So my energy and my motivation was at the ultimate high. It still is. But at that time, it was exceptional because I didn't know any better. And I was kind of frustrated as to why are these kids having so many tuition classes and they're constantly being put through so many conventional educational. So I just started playing with them. And through play, I just realized, I didn't just no science, there's no deep thinking, nothing to this. I was just like, you know what, just hell with these books. I'm just going to start playing. I want to know who these kids are and why are they the way they are, like what's happening in their lives. And started realizing, you know, that how these children who had been so closed started to change and started to open up. And and when we started playing, that whole space itself changed where this was all happening. It's just been a realization that has stayed with me ever since, that play doesn't just change how children learn, it changes the very spaces where they learn. And it feels like, you know, what those spaces feel like, what they allow for these kids to be, who these children are allowed to be inside these spaces, express themselves, be in their elements, like play just magically converts that instantly. It's been a long journey, lots and lots of work has happened. The approach has evolved, but the core idea of play has stayed. You know, some of the readings I wanted to put up on the slides to kind of contextualize that we have close to 100,000 low-income schools. We constantly see in a city like Mumbai, dense settlements. There's a recent study that an organization called Praja brought out on the state of schools. 54% of teaching posts are currently vacant in these schools. There is a whole and there is a whole lot of administrative staff that's completely missing from these schools. It's a huge percentage. Probably why that may indicate that a lot of the teachers end up doing a lot of the administrative duties in these schools. So there is no brain space and time to do anything else for these teachers. The statistics speak for themselves, like 8 and 10 grade 1 and 2 classrooms in India have no structured opportunity for children to speak, to collaborate, to explore it. The teacher talks and the children copy. Typically, that's the environment. You also see that 3 in about 4 government schools, school children cannot read the text of 2, which are 2 grade levels below them yet. So there's almost a 90% enrollment. So there is no enrollment issue over here. There's also this whole bit of how do I get to the next slide? Sorry, how do I do that? Oh, I just need to go to the next slide. Okay, yes. Got it. Yes. Done. There's also a lot of these impact assessment. We've done a lot of impact. You know, we've kind of gotten really excited and desperate to showcase how our children are learning to learn better, just because we've kind of installed play inside some of these schools and classrooms. So the readings, again, right in front of you. My favorite being, of course, there's a huge reading that we had done on the honesty levels, which is the teacher-student relationships. So a lot of the kids that we did this. It's a 3-year assessment we had done in a very, very dense slum community here in Mumbai. And a lot of the kids that came into the classrooms typically were very aggressive. So their way of expression was throwing things and, you know, being angry all the time. But many a times they've had a very bad start to their day. Domestic violence, for example, is very, very high in some of the homes in these communities. But for the kids to be able to express themselves from throwing things versus raising their hands and telling the teacher, hey, my day didn't start very well today. There was, my dad beat my mother in the morning and it was very, very good for me. So even to speak up like this, and for the teacher in turn to not only be kind and empathetic, but to genuinely be a good listener, the whole relationship between the two just completely changed. So, I mean, these are some of the, I can keep going on the anecdotal stories. There's so many of them. Chronic adversity pushes the brain into survival mode. Typically, the children that we see are always in. A child in that state can sit in a classroom, copy from the board, but it cannot think, it cannot imagine, it cannot grow. And for me, like, this is a problem. This is biology. This is not attitude or ability. And when we started putting in play and play-based learning into these schools, it just completely changed. In fact, to some of the points that you brought up earlier, I'll talk about it in a bit afterwards maybe, but there's a lovely Harvard's Global Flourishing study that was recently published, and it is brilliant that what the study simply found out was everything measured in it. Most important is laughing with other students had the single largest effect on adult flourishing. That's it. I mean, that's what it is. That's the whole ambience in terms of what play builds. Then we come to the whole bit of our program. It's all encompassing. We've evolved, of course, over the years. There's so much that has happened that's brought us to this point that, hey, we can't realize right to play by ourselves. Policy change is going to require us to rally up and build like a really large network of people doing different things. Can we complement each other and play to our strengths, and therefore create a system inside schools that allows for play to thrive and therefore for children to thrive. So this is pretty much the idea of how each element comes together, whereas at communities, with parents, at schools, with teachers, provide the materials, loose parts play, everything, design spaces in such a way. And these are difficult because it's, you know, these buildings are already set. So it's very hard to reconstruct and do anything. So we're able to kind of make do with whatever we have. And when a teacher plays alongside children, the emotional distance between them just disappears. So we've seen a lot of magical impact because of this. Just a quick clip of what's going on. I don't know if this plays. This is a video, so I'm not sure if it will play, but I'll stop my presentation there. But the idea is for us to be able to insert play into the schools, but not like how you insert a subject. It requires a shift in belief and what teachers think children deserve, what leaders think time is for. That shift takes a lot of time and patience. It takes making play very visible. We need to make it very visible. So we've done and tried and put everything out there, especially in the Indian context where there are so many other social issues that overpower and oversee play. Like, what is play? So that's been the biggest battle for us.
Yes. Shweta, thank you. Very, very informative. And you made me think for both you and Maria, as we go into, I want you to think of for the discussion, you talk, Shweta, about much of what it made me think of the cultural dynamics. Let's talk a little bit about the ethnicities, the gender issues, and the rural urban, because those are important in the uptake of play as a perspective into the policy action space, right? Both at the local community, the municipal, and in some instances, the county. You're talking about India, you talk about Maharashtra. It's very different in Pune. It's very different in Kolkata. Variations. How does that take form? And it brings me to Maria's 5 characteristics from the UNICEF study. This whole notion of security, connection and belonging, expression, in art and music. In some scenarios culturally, those are not important things, right? Mastery and giving agency, connecting the youth, and this sense of self. So please be thinking about that so that we can, in the discussion, really kind of needle that and express how that can translate at the multiple levels, because this is intersectional, for policy action. Okay. All right. With that, we go to Simon. Simon, I'm anxious to hear what your perspective. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. And thank you so much, Julika and Antonia, for the invitation today. So as Yolanda said, I come at this as an educator and an education researcher. A lot of my work asks, I guess, what is ultimately a relatively simple question. What are our educational environments doing to the people within them? Not only, what are the children learning, but what are they learning about themselves and about the kind of world they're expected to inhabit? So I want to offer 3 connected ideas today, many of which actually draw on things that have already been mentioned, particularly by Julika. And the first is that environment is never neutral. Schooling environments don't simply just contain children. They help to form them. And in transition design, there is an idea called ontological design. And the basic point of it is that we design our environments, but those environments design us back. And linking once again back to what Julika said, this is particularly pertinent and matters a lot in schools, because schools are spaces that shape how children move. Their spaces shape how they move, and their routines shape how they experience authority, and their assessment systems shape how they understand success, and all of that infrastructure shapes how they understand their own worth and their own ability to contribute to this fragile thing we call society. So often, though, when we talk about mental health in schools, we start with the individual child. We ask, is that child resilient enough? Can they regulate their emotions? Have they got the right coping strategies? And of course, all of that stuff is really valuable. But what concerns me is that sometimes we may become so focused on helping children cope that we stop asking what they're being asked to cope with. And, what happens when young people are constantly compared? What happens when they have almost no control over their time? What happens when they begin to believe that, their value depends upon some sort of performance? And I would argue that at that point, distress isn't something that's a problem located just inside the child. Sometimes the child isn't malfunctioning, so to speak. Basically, that distress is a logical, intelligible response to the world that we have built around them. So my first proposition is this: we can't meaningfully improve children's mental health without also examining the environments through which childhood is being organized. And that links to my second idea. And this has been mentioned by many of the other people who have spoken already, that play is not peripheral. We often treat it a little bit as if it's an interruption to the serious business of learning. It's squeezed in between lessons. We've heard already that it's been reduced dramatically year on year for many, many decades now. It's squeezed between lessons, or we offer it as some sort of reward once the real work has been done. But for children, actually for all of us, play is real work. Gosh, how I wish more adults would learn how to play. But anyway, because play is how we encounter possibility. Winnicott, who's a thinker who influences me a lot, said that play is at the heart of creativity and the experience of being fully alive. And other people have demonstrated, such as Russell and Lester, that it's fundamental to children's health and well-being. It's not just an optional extra. Through play, children, they try things out, they learn how to be with other people, they invent rules, and then they discover that those rules don't work. They learn what to do when somebody disagrees with them, or when the world refuses to behave as expected. And just as a little aside, that thing about people disagreeing with you is one of the reasons why we should be concerned, not necessarily about AI and these things in general, although there's a very wide discussion to be had about this, but particularly about young people growing up just talking to those AI chatbots, or talking to them more than they talk to real people. Because as we know, AIs will stroke your ego. They will never interrupt you when you're speaking. They will always wait their turn. There's no messiness, there's no friction. And that experience is probably not conducive to learning what to do in the real world. So, you know, we need to be careful of that stuff. But anyway, coming back, all of this matters because the future isn't going to behave as expected. I think that's a given. Before we started this conversation, we were talking about the climate crisis and everything that's going on there. And, you know, the world is changing dramatically. That is not a trite thing to say. It's not a cliche. This is actually what's happening. And children are going to need knowledge, but they're also going to need to learn how to improvise, because they're going to need to know how to cooperate with people who see the world differently, and they're going to need to learn how to act without knowing what's going to come next. And play is a rehearsal for that kind of life, because when children play, they experience agency, they encounter the agency of others, they understand that they can't dictate every outcome. They have to listen, they have to respond, and they sometimes have to, you know, just start again. And that's really important. Play is where children learn how to practice their freedom, and it's a type of freedom that's negotiated in the presence of other people. And I guess in that sense, it's the foundation, or the early foundation, of the democratic life. Here in the UK, we're going to be giving the vote to 16-year-olds. And I was at the all-party parliamentary committee meeting at the House of Commons a few days ago. I think that play is a fundamental part of democratic understanding. And therefore, if we reduce the opportunity for play, we reduce the capacity for young people to learn what it means to be active citizens in a democracy. So my second proposition is that play isn't just a break from institutional life. It's a rehearsal for living freely and relationally in an uncertain world. And just to link a little bit to what Shweta was talking about, this is also a question of justice, because we all know that some kids grow up with lots of green space and lots of opportunity, and others are surrounded by traffic. Some people are welcome into the space, and others are treated as though, you know, their presence is a problem. So play isn't just an educational issue, it is a public health issue. It's an urban design issue. It's a question of who has the right to occupy the city. And that links to my third point, which is, and this, once again, Julika and I had the pleasure of being at an event organised around amazing things happening in the UK around the Old Kent Road, and the work they're doing where they demonstrate that schools are not an island. And that's my third idea, that schools are not an island. We often think of schools as these kind of closed institutions, children coming in through the gates, they get educated, and then the gates close. But I'm going to say that schools are, and yesterday really reinforced this for me, they are one of the most important pieces of social infrastructure in any neighbourhood. They bring families together, they hold knowledge, they hold relationships, they have the buildings and the grounds, and because of that, they have convening power. You know, John Dewey said the school is a social institution, and I think we need to push that further. What if we stopped seeing schools just as like a place where education is delivered? What if we reimagine them as a civic and ecological space, where a place where communities could come together to practice a different kind of future? You know, a school could become a kind of neighborhood laboratory. Children could investigate why do some streets feel unsafe. They could begin to map out where play is possible and where it's not possible because it's been designed out. Why the skater kids have to go and hide away in some, you know, car park and get moved on all the time just for playing with their skateboards. Yeah, They could look at traffic, they could look at like air quality or biodiversity. But the whole point is that they could be part of changing the places they use every single day. Children are often asked what they think after the real decisions have been made. And that's not participation. It's a consultation without power. So if we're serious about children's agency, we must recognize that they possess knowledge adults don't have. And they know where they feel safe. They know where they're unwelcome. They know where play becomes possible and where it's prevented. And we shouldn't just design for children. We should create the conditions in which children can design with us. So my final proposition is this. The question is not only how we design healthier schools, it's how schools can help create healthier neighborhoods. And just to conclude, if I bring all that stuff together, the argument is simple. The environment is not neutral, play is not peripheral, and the school is not an island. Designed environments design children back. Play gives children a space to practice freedom and creating a shared world, and schools can become places where healthier and more democratic futures are not only taught, but they're actually lived. Thank you very much, everyone. I look forward to
Thank you for that, Simon. Three things of particular worth here are play as a rehearsal for life. And so I want that thread linking back to the earlier, we think of how, let's give some examples of how that could be infused into policy action and making. And engaging children in design and planning, which is critical, and the question of how schools can create healthier neighborhoods. Just thinking about that, because it's all well and good to off those, but we have to, the focus of this is social progress. How do we make an impact in policy action and policy thinking? People tend to say policy, but we have to influence policy thinking and action. So some food for thought as we get to the discussion section. And as we amble along through time, I want to go to Priyanka, Handa. Priyanka, let's hear from you, some perspectives on this.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone. It's really great to be here. And thank you, Antonia and Julika, for inviting me to join this incredible panel. I'm learning so much. I've written 4 pages of notes already from each of you. So thank you. I think I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to, not begin with schools. I'm going to begin before school, because by the time a child actually walks through the school gate for the first time, much of the architecture around brain development that then is what we've got for lifelong mental health, learning and flourishing has already been built. So I think when we talk about children's mental health and now talking about schools, we often start too late. And really the work that I do in Learn to Play is really focusing on the 0 to 5s, because neuroscience tells us that 90% of brain development occurs before the age of 5. So during these early years, when children are negotiating the rules of a game or deciding how to use that stick, is it a wand, is it something else? As they try and figure out why their tower broke down and how they can rebuild it. Those are the foundations for emotional regulation, for executive functioning, for empathy, stress response. And those kind of structures, those cognitive structures and systems that they're creating are not just shaping how they're going to learn through school, but actually how they relate to the world and people around them for the rest of their lives. They're what we want in employees. They're what we want in our colleagues at work. They're what we want in our spouses when we get married. And I think, not seeing play and early childhood education as something extra, but rather as exactly what we've been talking about, as how it absolutely is learning. So, and I think even this concept of well-being is not just something that you do separately to education. I think, at Learn to Play every single day in our play groups across the country, our children are practicing breath work, mindfulness, movement, as part of their school day, not just because we're trying to create quieter and better behaved classrooms, but because we're really trying to help children develop the internal capacities that they'll rely on for the rest of their lives. So I think if we're really serious about talking about mental health, we need to start where mental health begins. So that's really my first point. I think the second thing is we keep framing it, this narrative around play as a crisis, but I don't think we have a play crisis. I think we have an adult belief crisis. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions that we've been talking about collectively is, is that play is what children do in their free time once learning is finished. But obviously we know that the evidence tells us that, the exact opposite, that play is one of the primary ways the brain develops the very capacities that we can function at school and for the rest of our lives. And I think researchers like Stuart Brown have actually shown that there is this concept called play deprivation, and we don't talk about that enough. And play deprivation is not benign. It's actually associated with poorer emotional regulation, difficulties forming relationships, increased aggression. And I think in his work, he actually found that a play-deprived childhood was a strikingly consistent feature in the histories of many incarcerated individuals. And similarly, another researcher, Peter Gray, has argued that the long-term decline in free play in our societies has closely paralleled rising levels of anxiety and depression among children and adolescents. And of course, correlation is not causation, but that trend should, I think, give us a serious pause as adults in thinking about what should our response to that be. We've often doubled down in exactly the wrong places. So we see anxiety and depression and then poorer school outcomes and school results. So we go, let's tutor, let's do more assessment, let's do more structured activities, shorter break times, less freedom. And that squeezes the very thing that enables all of this, out of childhood. So I think the question that we need to be asking ourselves is not how do we fit more play into schools and into education, but actually asking why has education drifted so far away from the very thing that inspires how learning occurs. And I think the third, we've all touched on it in different ways, is why are we asking children to become more resilient instead of asking environments to become healthier? And I really struggle with that question. We praise, we celebrate resilience all the time. We celebrate how present children are and how adaptive children are. But I really think we've become too comfortable in asking children to adapt to environments that adults should actually be redesigning. We ask children to self-regulate in an environment with less time to play, with increasing academic pressure, with smaller spaces, with stressed caregivers. And I think when we look at that, we realize that children are not growing up in these silos. They don't experience education or health or family life or neighborhoods and friendships separately. They experience all of that as an ecosystem, as a community of people and of places together. And that ecosystem is only as strong as the adults within it. So again, coming back to Learn to Play, yes, we have an amazing curriculum that is play-based, but our curriculum doesn't help a distressed child regulate their emotions. It's the caring adult that does. And yes, every playgroup of ours has a playground, but a playground doesn't inspire belonging on its own. Again, the trusted relationships around that playground inspire that sense of belonging. So I think play doesn't simply flourish because it's on the timetable and we've got an hour to it. It flourishes because the adults in that ecosystem and in that child's life understand its value. They protect it and they make space for it. And so again, from a Learn to Play perspective, we invest so heavily in training. I think I just posted about this recently, that this month at Learn to Play, we're training mothers from 7 different districts around the country, but we're also training parents and local leaders, not just in what to teach, but actually in how to notice, in how to listen and how to co-regulate with children, because and actually giving them the support, the coaching and mentoring on a weekly basis thereafter. Because if we want flourishing children, we need flourishing adults. It's not just about the physical environment, the built environment, and it's not simply just about the programs and the curricula in that environment. So I think, just to echo what you were saying earlier, Simon, that schools can absolutely become an anchor for a healthy community, but only if they're connected to families, neighborhoods, and local systems that value play and belonging. And I think again, we need to stop asking what more do children need to do, but actually start asking what do adults need to become if we really want children to flourish. So I think I think just in closing, one of the questions that I keep asking myself is we've spent decades, I think, redesigning childhood to fit education systems. But I really think it's time we start redesigning education to fit childhood and start recognizing that education was always meant to grow out of play, not asking whether play can fit into our education timetables.
Yeah, thank you for that, Priyanka. And really makes me think, going back to the systems approach. As an epidemiologist who has spent a significant amount of my scientific career collaborating with geneticists and neuroscientists, it made me think of the role of gene bioenvironment interaction and the epigenetic aspects of cognition and how play plays a role in people's developmental perspective. You think of brain functioning or executive functioning in children, as you well know, or executive functioning is the last to develop in the brain in many aspects. And for males, it could go all the way to age 30. And so we need to really see how ecosystems and environment, when we talk about gene environmental interplay, what causes the myelination to what turns on particular aspects of people's reaction, what they get into trouble with, how they interact with other people. And a lot of this goes back to early brain development and the environment in which those brains have been allowed to develop. So unfortunately, scientifically, we're siloed in this because the neuroscientists and the epidemiologists, we don't think of talking to people who are in education, who are involved in play, but they're all interconnected. And so this is something I think we should off in the discussion. So I want to take us now to Marie, who's an engineer, which is fascinating, a chartered engineer. And again, this whole interaction of structure and function brings me back to Urban Brenner's notion of the social ecological approach to life and the recognition that systems are all into play. We are human beings are systems, and the environments and ecosystems in which we operate are systems based. So over to you, Maria. I'm anxious to hear your perspective.
Okay, everyone, thanks again for inviting me. I've got some slides, but I remember them off head. If you don't put them up, it's not too big a deal. It's really good that it's like we're speaking to the converted, and I think that's where I'm coming from. We're all coming from the perspective of play. We understand it's relevant for human development. We recognize its value for the first 2,000 years and 2,000 days of a child's life. So I put these statistics because recently I spoke at a WHO conference on healthy cities, and I think there may be 2 speakers out of the people from across the world who are speaking about play. And to get everybody's attention, I use stats, not just because I'm an engineer. And I highlighted that an obvious fact, the right to play is for everybody. So I think the right to play has been maybe ratified by 193 member states. So globally, the majority of governments have agreed that every child, regardless of their age, ability, gender, ethnicity, they have a right to play. But the work we've been increasingly doing is we're working in environments of polycrisis. So right now at Dream Networks, which is the organization I'm the CEO and founder of, we're working in Uganda, in a refugee settlement that is consistently losing funding. It recently was in The Guardian, Kirandango. It's lost so much funding, UNHCR taking out funding, everyone's taking money out. But yet they say we want to work with you to help children aged 2 to 6 to develop through play. When there maybe isn't materials, there isn't security, there's what's the best word, precarity, uncertainty, and all of that needs to work in an environment of play. So I'm trying to really set the scene that play is important for every child, but the conditions that enable play are often not afforded in many environments around the world. The next statistic is one from the UK. I'm from South London. Anybody who's from London can maybe tell from my accent. And around 2 in 5 children have to walk more than 15 minutes before they get to green space. And when you look in areas like Croydon, which is more the suburbs of London, it gets even worse. And these are more economically deprived environments. So again, every child's got a right to play, But not only is it that they've got the conditions where there's marginalization, poverty, temporality preventing play, but even just the land value, the space, is other things are prioritized. So green space is out of the window. Then one that is probably all known by majority of us, around 1 in 5 children are currently in extreme poverty. And when there's extreme poverty, I think a lot of us in the talk have work in this environment. Part of my academic work, we're looking at, again, a refugee settlement in an urban environment. And when we're speaking to the mothers, they'll say, my child hasn't got the energy to play because they're hungry. My child can't play because there's other priorities in the environment. So poverty is a key factor that prevents this thing that we believe policy has told us globally is a right. It's a right to play. It really is prevented by these conditions, these systematic conditions, be it structural, be it more environmental, etc. So next slide, which, oh no, can I see the next slide? Yeah, I think it's coming. So, so great. So this is going to show you a bit more of our work. So at Dream Networks, we co-design and make play spaces. Yes, I'm an engineer, so it means as much as we may do the research we want to make. And the example on the left-hand side is a play space we were working in Stratford, which is an area that is extremely multicultural. It's where the Olympics occurred, so it got a lot of investment, but in terms of where the investment went, you can really see the differences. You can have one street that looks quite developed and has growth, for lack of a better word, and another environment which has much more visible signs of deprivation. So this environment, this school is amazing. This school has a really play-based ethos, and I won't go into detail in that, but really significantly play-based. But when you look at the space that they had, they created on their, concrete floor, they had, soil, other materials in that environment, and the children themselves were given the time to be able to create opportunities for play. They had loose parts, which meant they were able to design themselves as they're playing, because for me, particularly play is a heart of design. So as they were playing, they were able to design their space. So redesign with children. So to be able to do that, we observed the children in that space. What were they already doing? What were they already affording to the environment? What were they already exploring? What were they already doing in innovation? And I think talking on Priyanka's point, and this is from a design perspective, one of the things we say is that we design with children, we do co-design workshops, we keep them really interactive, science, technology, engineering, mathematical based, so there's a lot of learning. But the role of the adult is to be able to design up, so take it beyond what they're already doing to make it something that affords even more to the environment, that speaks to the funders who want to provide money. Hopefully that makes sense. So we worked with them and we decided actually, in that environment, it's really built up, and the real value for a flourishing environment is considering how can we make the space more regenerative beyond what they bring in. How can we add in more biodiversity that enables them to engage more in cognitive development, that enables them to be able to think more widely, it makes them to question the environment, like what is a worm, how's a worm, how can we touch a worm, things like that. So we really focus on being able to design with children, but design up a space to make it even more flourish, so there's ability for them to engage in the main taxonomies of play, be it White Bird's 5 taxonomies or Bob Hughes' 16 taxonomies, or I recently was actually at a conference with Peter Gray, which you guys mentioned, and we were speaking about environments for play and the neuroscience of an environment and what it affords and what the different senses do. So creating an environment where there's significant sensory engagement that enables inclusive play. That's really what I think is important for flourishing, enabling children to design with, but actually see what else can we do to enable that environment to be more inclusive to different opportunities of play that enable a child to learn. The image on the right-hand side is an award we won recently. And I'll go through this really briefly, but we reactivated a space in Peckham, which is, again, an area of economic deprivation. You can see the trend. And but highly, it's going for gentrification, it's extremely multicultural. And we actually won the award by focusing on something you call conviviality. So how do we create a space where people from different cultures, different economic backgrounds came together and felt like they could belong, they could connect, they could play. Children at younger ages, before they have their own barriers, be it a racial barrier, be it a language barrier that makes them think they cannot speak to another person. How could we create that to be a healthy environment? And then when we won, I actually was shocked. I was like, because we really did go against the grain, and they recognize the fact that play is something that produces public health. Then my last slide, which I'll go through extremely quickly, is something that we have created, and I'm happy to speak to somebody, talk about this later, or you can reach out to me. and it's called the Play Prosperity Framework. This has come out of academic work as well, and it's been tested in Kirandango, it's been tested in, which is in Uganda, in Kenya, and also in the UK. And we're saying to be able to consider play, we think about prosperity from the perspective of the local citizens. So we work with the citizens to understand, what does play look like to you? We don't use that language, but why is play important to you? What brings joy to you in play? And we use that to create indicators that do really drive our design process, but also drive the conversations we have with funders, the policies, the conversations we have with people in public health, members of government. And we're really trying to see, how can we take these design frameworks, these participatory design, indicators, and enable them to not only shift the way play spaces are designed to have a wider perspective about what play is and health, but also influence local policy. And I have no questions. I've just hopefully given you a lot of food for thought.
Well, thank you so much, Marie. That's a great way of rounding this discussion out. Play produces public health. I'm going to walk around with that and process that with my other colleagues who never think of play as not significant. But you what you did was bring. I asked earlier presenters to think of the cultural dynamics. I didn't include the structural dynamics. The structural dynamics of poverty, social deprivation, and the built environment, social and economic deprivation, the built environment. In your last play disparity framework, oh my gosh, that's gold. I'm going to come back to you on that later because we just have 15 minutes. I want to ask Joseph to add or audience to the room on stage so that I can see if there are any questions from the audience before we go forward. I see Karthika and Mabel and Pooja and Abigail. Joseph, are you able to allow them to join? While we wait for them to join, I want to come back to what I asked you to think about. Now we're adding the socio-structural dynamics, but the role of cultural dynamics, forgive me, not Priyanka, Shweta and Maria, to think a little bit about how this interplay of cultural dynamics in getting the uptake of the value of play as a public health imperative in a community. Have you given any thought? I'll start with you, Shweta, and then come to you, Maria.
It's a little tricky in our case because if we talk about the rural spaces, a lot of the people typically migrate constantly. They're looking for better jobs, better opportunities. It's seasonal, so wherever they're able to get better. So a lot of the times, there's the kids not only take a break from school, sometimes they just miss entire school years.
Yeah.
And this pretty much affects everything. But in some of the cases we've seen, we work in a lot of schools. We work in close to 1,000 schools over here, and we've actually seen cases where when they come back to their villages, some of these people who migrated for whatever reasons, the kids actually want to go back to the same school they were in spite of the gap they've had. And this is not just because, it's a brilliant school and it's got everything sorted, but there's simply a lot of play in those schools. Our programs have been flourishing and making sure that everybody gets their playtime. So I still lean on, there are two things. One is from a health perspective, the kids in rural areas have more spaces. So there's a lot of physical movement, there's a lot of space to run around, there's a lot of all of that happening. Even the schools themselves are designed in such a way there's more corridor space and in and around. But in cities like Bombay, oh my God, you're talking about London and my heart just shrank because it's like, you have to see Bombay to believe it. It's a nightmare. We don't even have sometimes footpaths to walk on, let alone spaces. And our organization just we recently did a state of play research 6 months ago, and we 60 to 70% of our kids' parents, teachers in that study told us that it takes them at least 45 minutes to find a space to play. So that much distance is, it's far, and it's just nothing is available, especially in the cities. It gets really difficult. It's even worse for girls. So when you get down to the gender piece, it's already so hard that play itself is supposedly esoteric, is what I've been told many, many times, the whole idea of play. So then for the girls, it gets even worse, because, and our study actually calls that out very clearly, that I think almost 40% of the girls we studied, but 600 kids that we studied in the study, almost 40% of them play less than an hour a day if they get a chance to play, versus the boys are at about 14%. So, and typically they are made to do house chores, the girls, it's not safe. And an interesting thing also, this breaks the genders, not only for the girls, but even the boys, especially actually for the boys, because one of the things that our study told us, that some of the parents, beyond a certain age, when they reach adolescence, the parents don't want to send their boys out to play in public spaces, just because they're scared that they will get into bad company, which is a real problem, actually. So it was interesting to see that they would rather have them in and around, or it's okay if they're on mobile phones and playing something, but they don't want them to go outside, because they'll end up landing themselves in bad company, and parents fear that. So that is also a different reason why they don't allow their kids to play. So, and all of it adds up to poor health, mentally and physically, across.
So, food for thought in interacting with the policymakers. Those are some important things to point out. Spaces to play. Maria, you've got Latin American experience. What are you seeing there in this regard with these dynamics?
Yeah. So, in terms of cultural dynamics, but also how different cultures understand play, I would say that and I think this may be more universal, that like context specific, but it's much harder to change how adults think about play than it is to actually implement programs and opportunities for play. And there's this dichotomy around how culture understands school and how we understand play. Because play is free and school is timetabled. Play does not have a goal, and in schools, children must meet these certain list of goals. So how do we bridge those ends of the spectrum so that, like Priyanka said, instead of us trying to make play fit in the school, we see this more of a spectrum of possibilities that children can have, where adults intervene, but adults also follow children's lead. And in terms of culture, I mean, the best schools I've seen in terms of situated, contextualized learning projects that are playful, that are child-led, came from rural schools.
Children are freer, apparently.
And we need to bring the attention to how these schools are implementing play and spotlighting them, because we do have this misconception that urban will be better, when in many cases children are just being taught to the tests better in these urban schools.
Thank you. I see Maria has her hand up, and then I'm going to go to our two audience member who made it to the platform. Marie.
Actually, just in agreeing, but I'll make a quick point, just purely from a play design perspective, particularly when you look at the rural environment compared to the urban, there's some key striking differences, particularly like in the UK, but also in Kenya, the ability to recognize that children often have fixed, standardized play equipment. And then what do they associate with their play, compared to when you're in an environment that you have less things that are standardized. So you work with the loose parts around you. You hear music, you dance. You move your body and you create play. And your mindset of play goes beyond the more Western or standardized affordance of what could produce play. And your embodied movement and interaction with other people is what produces play. So particularly in the design of play, I'm soon writing Julika now. Like I've got a book chapter coming out, and it's on decolonizing the aesthetics of play. And the main focus there is actually our mindset of how a play space should look is so fixed in one side in what looks beautiful, and then we completely take away the heart of what play is, that ability to explore, to produce.
Right.
There's many things to play. But yeah, that's my perspective on it.
Well, that's a very interesting point you bring, Marie, because I'm thinking of India. When you go around India, I've worked in New Delhi and Kolkata. Children identify spaces. And I've grown up in South America where, the boys play cricket in a little field over there. There's a buried path, they have tires, car tires or bicycle tires that they run along with, or whatever. They make that up. So that's a very important point. This dynamics, and the critical thing. Because we're on, this is about social progress and how we influence policy action and policy thinking, is how do we get that into the minds of the local municipalities and the communities so that it can become truly part of the ecosystem. I want to go very quickly to Karthika and Mabel to see if you have any questions, recognizing that we're having time constraints.
Right. I'm just going to quickly come in because this is very interesting. And since we get like a global perspective and things here, since we're talking about playing and learning, I was also wondering about the impact of video games in this context, because we do see video games as a very big emerging field, especially when it comes to kids. We see a lot of push towards that as well. There's a lot of money that is being made with with pop culture and new sort of games coming in. So how does that kind of factor into this ecosystem? And that's part one. And I was going to ask another because we have another project of ours going on. So I work with an organization called the 8 Goals 1 Foundation, and we have the FAIR project going on, and we can connect about it outside this. But we have change makers. So the crux of it's an experiential program where we have young adults between the age of 18 to 27 who come and who spend 2 months with us, and we talk them through our methodology, and they also do offline immersion where they go into the community and they engage and intervene. And this year, the theme is education. And one of the few interventions that the students who are part of the cohort are doing, the change makers they're doing, is figuring out how gamification can actually influence a child's experience in schools. Some of them are creating repositories. Some of them are actually testing certain games with kids in their own classrooms to see how they respond to it, and if they see that as a learning opportunity or is it too distracting for that ecosystem. So for that as well, like how do we all often view, because when I was growing up, I viewed games as purely like a joyous activity, and now we're increasingly seeing that as, oh, it could be a puzzle and could teach you a couple of things as well. So how does that work out in the current landscape?
Okay. Someone wants to take that. Simon, I'll come to you. Are you responding to what she said?
I can respond to that, and then I've also got something else that I'd want to add.
Okay, so before we go to your response, Mabel, did you have a question? And so then we could take the 2 questions and then have, yes.
Oh, thank you so much. Very exciting conversation. Thank you so much to all the presenters and the discussants. I'm a medical doctor by profession. I'm in Lusaka, Zambia. I work very closely with Dr. Thomas. And currently we are working with young people who play sports, particularly football. So these are young people that play soccer outside school. And this is because our schools are very crowded right now. They don't have the space. Everything that you guys have discussed, most of the challenges are happening right here in Zambia because there's just no space. They don't understand play. So they are going out in spaces to find where they can quench their play. So they're playing football, and particularly it's the girls. Now, what's interesting is that we are developing some sort of tools that can help these young people that are playing football outside school. And one thing that really struck me is what Maria mentioned. I think she mentioned a model that they've done with the study. I'm very particularly interested in that because we are looking at the 5 C's of positive development, which is one of the frameworks that have been used over time to enhance youth development. And then for Marie, the last framework that you shared, which is around the framework that you shared is also very similar to the framework that we just designed. Ours is around health, integrating health, education, family support, as well as health, education, family support, as well as, I can't remember the last bit, but that's how we're doing it. So for me, we are now at a stage where we are trying to implement, but we just want to make sure that we are actually addressing the needs of these young people, and we're just not doing things outside, out of what we just think. We want to make sure that their needs are actually being addressed. And a very great conversation that was happening was around how we are just not thinking about what the kids need or what the kids are lacking, but how can we provide that built environment around them. So looking at this, my ask really is just around connection and around seeing how best we can design this program. It could even be at areas where we look at these frameworks and then we see how we contextualize it to our country, because there's just a lot of context that's lacking that may need to be incorporated into some of the frameworks that are being designed. So I'm happy to connect and see where we can then just come up with all these exciting interventions for the young people, because adolescents and young people are really my passion. The health and well-being of adolescents and young people are where my passion lies. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mabel. So Simon, you have the task of go ahead if you can tackle either one or both of those, and then I'll quickly do a round robin before we close. Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, just really, really quickly, I wanted to pick up on something that Kartika said, and also something you said as well, Yonette, which links in a little bit to Maria. Kartika, you mentioned about how we can learn from play, and that is absolutely true. And of course, play is incredibly formative. But I think one of the issues is that simple insight, because of the structures of our system, becomes instrumentalized. And what happens is that we try to turn play into another capacity to be measured. And in doing so, we actually lose the essence of what the power of play is. So we must be very careful that when we wish to recognize the contribution of play and integrate it into our systems and make the case for it, that we do it in a way that doesn't end up actually undermining the very thing that we're trying to achieve. And that's very difficult because the system demands us to show evidence. Policymakers want to see that, okay, well, play can have this type of outcome and they can measure it, So that very demand creates those conditions. Mm-hmm. But I think we have to be very mindful of pushing back on that. And then just something else I wanted to bring in was speaking to Maria's point. I've been very blessed that I have spent 10 of the most formative years of my life living in Peru. My children were born there. So I have some insights into Latin America. And one of the things that I think is so important about the conversation we're having today is the intersectionality of it, because when we have multiple perspectives, we are forced to see the limitations of our own viewpoints. One of the things that I always noted in Peru was the tendency to, well, they call it vacaciones útiles, because obviously just spending your vacation not doing anything is inútil, is a waste of time. So it's also the case here in the UK, parents who can afford it send their kids to camps or whatever. But in Peru, it was like, it blew my mind, the extent to which people did not just want their kids to not do anything for a little bit, and how that was some sort of terrible, terrible waste of their time. And that just links a little bit to Yolanda's point that we need to understand these things and try to create the conditions for ensuring that when we talk about these things, we are aware of those cultural differences and we can work actively with communities from a point of view that is not imposing a certain paradigm, but is in conversation with those groups.
Excellent.
Try to create those differences.
Yes. Thank you, Simon. In the interest of time, I want to ping the others. Julika and Antonia, Marie and Priyanka, quickly, 1 30-second response to what you heard from Mabel and Priyanka. Any thought and additional thoughts here?
I can go quickly. I sent a book that is called The Learning Game, and it's quite a good book in terms of, like, I think particularly in UK, often people say things about video games, gamification, not just because I'm an engineer, there's benefits to it. And there's like, that book's a very good book. So my ending thing is educating you to try it out, because it will respond to your question.
Okay, excellent. And I'll share that with our audience's part. Thank you for that. Any other thoughts as we need to wrap up? We're 6 minutes over. There's never enough time, and this is one of the reasons why we try to segment. But it does tell me that I should think of further programming to include a second conversation on this, because this is so very important when we think of human flourishing and social progress. Any last words from any of you at this point? Well, I want to thank. Oh, go ahead, Julika.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just very briefly, I was going to say, whilst my natural response might be more negative about gaming, I think really what we should ask is what kind of experiences and relationships and opportunities that digital play offers, and how those align with what we know about healthy human development. So to try and make it less about being good or bad, I think is key to ask. Yes, I'll leave it at that, as you say.
Yes.
Time, but it's a really great question. Thank you for bringing
Yes. So, go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick one. I just want to kind of just say that for me, like, every child arrives in this world just knowing how to play. We are spending years of our times, sometimes a whole childhood, educating them out of it. So our job, I think, for all of us in this room is to stop doing that. I think the children are ready. The question is whether we are. And play is universal, but the access to it is not. That needs to be questioned.
Brilliant last words. And on that note, I think that's a perfect note for us to end. The conversation will continue. Thank each of you for your amazing perspectives, your expert work, and I will find a way, Antonia will tell you, to make this continue. Thank you, Karthika and Mabel, for persisting in the audience. Sometimes it's hard to step up, but we will continue this discussion. I want to thank each and every one of you, and onward and upward. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Care.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.